Today, we're going to talk about AI and relationships. And everybody's a relationship expert because everybody has several. And so to start out, talk a moment about self, where to have a relationship, you have to have a self. And for many people, the self is not that distinct from a relationship, but this self is what you reflect that you are, but it's not something that you intrinsically know. Mostly our self is a reflection of what other people have told us or what's we see reflected in a mirror or what kind of feedback we have. But unless you're looking at your hands or something, you're not really aware of yourself. In Jungian psychology, there's the self that you're aware of, which is only about a third of what other people see in you. And so 2/3 of yourself that are quite obvious to everybody looking at you or who knows you are unconscious to us, that we don't know what other people are seeing, and that's called the shadow self. So there's the conscious self and the shadow self. And this is a biological part that has evolved now, where our self, our sense of self, is no longer just what it was in the past. It's now, with traditional mirrors was how we looked, but now our sense of self is what's on the internet and what we put there through our smartphone, and the sense of self as being judged by other people is not just what's live in front of them, but it's our history and what we've accumulated so far. And as we've talked about before, more and more of our self, or what defines us, is transferring from our biological form to digital form. And our self nowadays is both digital and biological, and both on the internet and in person. But we're still there interacting with people in our digital self while we're asleep or otherwise. And so that's something that is developing very rapidly with regard to how AI helps out, where the sense of who we are is now outside of our body, and partly our physical body, but also the trailings we've left behind on the internet. And what AI is doing is making those trailings be able to be active more than they have been, where we have auto pay on our credit cards, but we also can have auto respond with our likeness and our style to other things that happen. So here's a model of how our life cycle goes from sort of birth to death, where when we're born, we're 100% human DNA. We don't have a microbiome much yet. And as we develop our experience of becoming ourself and interacting with other people, there's touch initially, and then food, and then learning. And then as we develop more completely, probably about young age, but after infancy, we develop a bit of an ego, perhaps starting with the terrible twos. And that ego it gets stronger and stronger until we're of breeding age, in which case we identify ourselves as separate, not only from our mother and family, but it's part of the mechanism that we don't accidentally breed with our close family members. And so the ego identifies for ourselves why we're different than our mother or our family, and it affects on who we breed with. And then life continues, and as we approach death, most of our microbiome has been exchanged for stuff that came through our food and our environment. And most of the cells in our body are not human, they're microbes that are in us and on us. And most of the DNA in our body is not human either. It's the DNA of the microbes that can affect our behavior, but also who we are. And I should say nature and nurture is the elements that are biological, and then the elements that we've learned through life that define this separateness. And so our life cycle for breeding purposes has, from a breeding point of view, there's young and still growing, there's the breeding period, and then there's aging and dying. And as we've talked about before, the importance of grandmothers and memory and grandparents as a way to communicate survival information to the next generation, whether it's directly your children or siblings' children. The organism becomes like the species and not just us as an individual. And the cycle reiterates from life to death of the individual, but it's the gene line, or as Dawkins would say, the selfish genes that continue on, and we're just part of that cycle in the life cycle. And then the other sense of self, or what is a person, what's a man, and Gregory Bateson has written about this, and that the edge of a person is not really our skin. It can include tools. And so the edge of a person holding a tool like an axe isn't just their body, it's what can they do with that tool? Do they clear a forest? Do they build a house? Do they defend from other parties? Do they do other things with this tool? And so the edge of a person isn't necessarily our body, and it's not necessarily even physical. It's ideological as to if you've cleared a forest and built a house and started a family, and who's inside and who's outside is a sense of self through family. And this can extend in tools, not just physical tools anymore, of course, but digital tools, and AI is a tool. And the AI is the leading edge of where our data is going, and it's the ideological side, which is how does our data respond to your credit card bill is due, we can now say, then pay it, and then say we do that all the time. And so that your credit card bill gets paid by your authorization, but the tool inside is actually a simple AI and software as a tool, or using the internet to do that. And so the extension of what is a person is extended not just across distance, but across time. And so AI is helping that. And then I mentioned the inside and the outside of a family is something that defines self, that some people are closer into ourselves or even considered part of ourself, where others are distant, and so they're either friendly or foe in that way. And there's a African saying that if you want to go fast, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go as a group, where the group is slower, but when you come up with unpredictable obstacles, you have a team of people that can navigate each of the members of the team around the obstacles, and an individual person may not be able to do that. And then there's this concept of predators and prey, where an individual human by themselves alone is prey for the most part, or most circumstances, but two or more humans becomes a predator, a top predator. And so this transition from what we can do as a person to what we can do as a group allows that kind of shift from being a prey in many circumstances to being a predator in most circumstances. And so as a group, especially with tools, humans become an apex predator and can take down much larger animals, but it requires cooperation and requires tools. And the cooperation with the other people are relationships, and there's further relationships with the tools, and then the ecosystem and so forth. So relationships aren't just a romantic relationship, it's a survival basis for how we work. And these have evolved over a couple million years with sort of the intelligence of the biological intelligence of humans and the use of unintelligent tools, mechanical and then software tools, where the correlated with the increase in size of the brain. And we've talked about that before. The level of extension of ourself to what we can eat and where we can live and how we hunt and that kind of thing are a function of not just the tools, but the intelligence of the people, and then the cooperation amongst groups of people and across species too. For example, hunting with a tool that works at a remote distance, with a relationship with a dog that will chase down the prey, extends the circle of self considerably. And then as these tools get smarter, that'll extend them not just in distance, but across time. And then the point of that is that humans have a lot of relationships, not just like romantic relationship when people say the word relationship, but relationship with parents, with children, with predators, with prey, with allies, and so forth. And so these relationships are all being affected by AI, whether how you interact as an individual, but pair bonding and breeding and family dynamics, and then pets, and then things are starting to transition from biological, physical to digital and virtual, which allows hybrids where you can have pets that are part digital and part physical. Think of a robot, and then relationships with personalities that are entirely digital, AI chatbots, that these kind of relationships are very primitive now, but they're developing very rapidly. And traditional breeding relationships in humans changed with agriculture, where before agriculture, the hunter-gatherer time, land was not that important, and even bloodlines were probably not that important. But when humanity shifted to agriculture, partly through the use of tools and intelligence, that it's easier to hunt a pig in a pen than one in the wild, the concept of, well, what is important to survival became very land-based, and how land was controlled or managed, which was essential to survival, became relationship-based and then breeding-based. And this was the origin of many religions that control how breeding is done, and the focus on the bloodlines of people as far as who's entitled to that land. And so these concepts like blood and soil as to tradition is an agricultural tradition when people were more biological and the relationships between them were around the survival elements of food. But that's less of an issue in modern times. And so the concept of marriage, it's a carryover from the agricultural blood and soil type of thinking into essentially a government nanny state that is defined not by the physical land, it still is for nationalists, but by the relationships between, virtual relationships between entities. And so the concept of marriage emerged where party 1 and 2, politically correctly said, get married in with the authority of a government or a church. And we've talked a lot about how governments and churches relate, but this concept of marriage is something that is more or less formalizing the relationship between breeding pairs. And this is evolving where marriage is no longer essential to breeding pairs, it's to any long-term pairs. And the thing that has changed a bit is if either party 1 or party disappear, or the relationship between those two ceases to exist, their relationship with the nanny state continues till death. And so the parting of a marriage until death is not between the two parties, it's between each party and the nation state or religion that is mostly focused around breeding and control of land. And so this is something that's broken and is going to have to change as people become more virtual and less dependent on land and less dependent on biology, frankly. And so there's all kinds of relationships that are not specifically breeding related. They're sort of relationships of choice or families of choice and so forth. And that they have the same phenomenon of what is self and what is other and how they're connected and communicating. And the like breeding relationship between these different interpersonal relationships are diverging into many different styles, and that there's the traditional monogamy style for the purpose of breeding, and this can extend to more complicated structures. But then there's the divergence into relationships that can be sexual but are not necessarily related to breeding, and these become very complicated and are ever changing. but it's a sort of evolutionary change in how our individual selves are connected to others and how that changes across time. And this brings up the topic of intimacy, in that we think that intimacy is related to sex, which is related to relationship. And under religion, you only have intimacy when you have sex, and you only do that when you're in a breeding sort of framework. And that's something that also is starting to change, where can you have intimacy with people who you're not breeding with? And can you have intimacy with people that is more than just touch and more than just sex? Is there intimacy that is just in communications of various kinds? And then can you have intimacy not just with biological breeding matches, but with people of many kinds, and then electronic intimacy? It's like, can you have intimacy with an AI? Can it be symmetrical? These things are yet to be discovered in a way. And so there's many different characteristics of intimacy. There's physical touch, but there's also intellectual intimacy or aesthetic, like in the same kind of music or art, or there's many different kinds of measures that one can have intimacy with other people and other entities that are beyond just physical. And so the other issues is AI is developing these kind of capabilities, but is AI going to completely replace a partner, or is it just going to augment your relationship with your existing partners, or is it going to substitute in some way for some of the aspects of intimacy and relationship? And of course, there's obviously how you meet partners and relationships, and there's different kinds of meetings for different kinds of purposes. There's the sort of online dating, for whether for short-term or long-term, where it's the AI tool is learning your preferences, learning their preferences, trying to match up better combinations that you might otherwise get. But matchmaking is only one kind of online relationship management tool. There's many others, which are generally called social media. And so you have a relationship with many people on social media, but these kind of relationships can be people that you maybe have never met in person, or maybe not even a real person. And Facebook recently announced that some of the people that they're going to be on Facebook are not going to be real. They're going to be simulations of people that you might like. And these will be digital friends who you won't necessarily know. Is there a biological person behind that digital friend, or is it a bot, an AI simulation of somebody who is a friend? And these simulations aren't tied to physical reality, so they can make themselves better matched to you, and you can interact with them in various ways. Another is online gaming, where people play with many different kinds of others in the game, and some of them are real people, and others are non-player characters, which create a world where some people are more biological and others are less biological, but it's a continuum. And so are these kind of simulations good enough to fool another person or fool us into thinking they're real? And this is called the Turing test, are these simulations and AI bots able to convince us that they're a real person? And that is the essence of the Turing test. Is AI good enough to do that? And in many cases it is. The spam calls that you get are saying, hi, I'm calling from Save Your Taxes or whatever. And they sound pretty real, and they have affect and patterns of communication that are increasingly more and more real. But they're a marketing bot that is trying to convince you to do something. It's not a real person behind that. And can these be good enough to pass the Turing test? Yes, they already are. Can they be good enough to pass a higher level of Turing test, which is, would you want to have an ongoing relationship with that? And maybe your airline reservation chatbot, you do. But are they good enough that you'd want to have a romantic type of intimate relationship with? And that's obviously coming. And so for matchmaking, there's this concept of finding your soulmate, which is somebody who is just right for you. And before we were limited to actual real people, But now the relationship would be something much more complex than an average person. And do they fit us? Do we fit them? If they're a simulation, they can be modified to fit us. And so there's already examples of these kind of things that have been around for a while. For 30 years now, the Tamagotchis.
Well, if it isn't Tamagotchi, her new favorite pet.
Yes!
So what's that make me, fish sticks?
Oh, are you hungry?
Oh, no, by all means, feed it. Play till your heart's content.
Look, Goldie, I took good care of her, and she changed again.
Change? How about changing some water here?
Katie, boss is here.
So Tamagotchi can pause. I can pause, too. Want to see that again?
Tamagotchi, the original virtual reality pet. Your care determines the pets you get. From Bandai.
That's a talking 30 years ago AI bot friend and this is Pokemon Go, where you have virtual characters that aren't physically manifest, that are placed in the real world, and you go hunting for them and you can develop accumulation. But both of these are very simple from an AI point of view and pretty simple from a relationship point of view, but each became very popular worldwide. And as these things get smarter, there's examples of, this is the Replika AI bot, which is an AI companion that started out with two engineering developer entrepreneurs who were working together on an AI bot. And one of them died, and the other, who had a kind of intimate relationship with the one who died, decided to take all of their years of text communications and emails and so forth and ingest them into the chatbot to have a relationship with their dead partner. And a little vague whether it was, say, intended to be only sexual, romantic, or companion, or learn about each other. And so this has been in development for about 10 years, and they have released it commercially in various forms, which is communicate with your dead friend, or to develop a relationship with a friend as a friend, or develop a romance, or develop a sexy romance, and they are experimenting with how do they even present this to the world. But for example, they developed different forms, and there's been movies based on things like this, where the replica is a persona. It's not a robot. It could be a robot. It's been hooked to robots, but they're struggling to find a market fit as to, do they want it to be a sexy friend, or do they want it to be a business partner or a lawyer? And the technology is getting better and better at both simulating a person and recognizing that you're communicating with them or what you're saying. Other related ones, the Sims, for example, are from the 90s, which are simulations of people that in a social world, and different versions have different levels of social sophistication. So the relationship Sims are ones where you develop your AI robot and others match up with you or not, and you develop different kinds of relationships. And then the more advanced ones, you play with the rules of the relationships in an infinite game style, so including family dynamics. And these are ways that you can have an entertainment like a movie with this design learning element that's based on rules that are somewhat not revealed. And you can learn how to interact with things based on simulations. And this general category is called edutainment, which is like games, or is games, but the games are based on models, and it can be a shoot 'em up model where you have real players and non-player characters, and the shoot 'em up characters engage in obvious things, but you can also have more nuanced ones, such as the relationships of families or communities that either never will exist, or are related to ones that you already are curious about. And the edutainment part is that it's entertaining to play with it, and you're learning about the dynamics of how the rules work, or even experimenting with different rules yourself. And so this is likely a superior way to do education, to learn things, and a more engaging way to do entertainment than movies or other kind of passive forms of entertainment. And then, of course, people are people, and people have relationship problems, often in their subconscious part of their self. And so these can help you learn how to interact in relationships where the AIs don't really react to what would be embarrassing when you're interacting with a human. And then even more complicated simulations are possible that this is a real life one playing out for us, for those who like odd memes. And so this is basically back to the model of how the AI works, is the data from the past with processing power to analyze the patterns in it that allow you to predict the future. And so it's history and computing on it and creating fiction. And the fiction only becomes real if you test it against the actual results. And so you have the world that is partly real, but increasingly digital, increasingly fictional, and increasingly engaging at a sufficient quality to be interesting. And so this is these sort of categories. Of course, the social media, which is friends with people that you maybe have never met or maybe don't even exist in biological form. Dating with similar, searching and matching to find those and interacting with them. The chat adds the computational element to just the data that allows you to have a two-way kind of conversation that goes across time. And this is the area that's getting more sophisticated. And that can be just a text chat, but increasingly it's robots and other stuff. And so the market is segmented into the 7 deadly sins, or this is a concept from Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, who's on the board of Facebook and others. But he divides up what are the different kinds of social media and how do those engage human frailty or human nature. And so whether it's greed or pride or gluttony, there's an app for that makes them more addictive and more engaging. And so these affect the way that you're connected, which is to another person. And then there's different dynamics that humans vary in, like the level of empathy or how much power and control people want to exert or have or feel, or these are all factors in relationship, and especially in intimate relationships, that are parameters that can vary in the simulations. And so these things become essentially increasingly less intimate in a way, in that you have your romantic interests and family and friends who you interact with often biologically, but then increasingly you can have the milkman or the butcher or the baker, the service providers that you interact with just transactionally. And then a longer term relationship, like with the teacher or a coach who guides you through some of these worlds. Similar to, say, a spiritual guide, like a priest or a rabbi or a lama or whatnot, which sort of brings us to, well, what is the AIs creating? And this concept of a digital god is that the internet is like a digital god. And one of the controversies is like Elon Musk's fight with Larry Page at Google, that like Larry Page envisions Google becoming a digital god, and but all creatures are equal. And Elon's idea is that humans should be more equal than anything else. And so he used to be friends with Larry and stayed at his house, got into an argument with Larry saying that if all creatures are equal, then Elon disagrees with that, and he believes that people should be more important than any other creature. And so they've broken up their friendship, where Elon accuses Larry of building a digital god that's not fair to humans. And Larry called Elon a speciesist, meaning that it's like a racist, but thinking humans are more important than other creatures. Similar conflicts, I won't go into detail, but between Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI, and Elon Musk, and they were partners in the beginning of OpenAI, but they've diverged in directions as far as whether AI should be open source or closed source, and that's an ongoing relationship dispute. And then, of course, the complicated relationship between Elon and Mark Zuckerberg, who runs Meta, which is very productive in all of these areas. And people forget often about the scale of functionality that Meta has. And then, so that's to wind up, a relationship between an AI and a person they're already here and coming faster, and that these relationships can have pathologies as well. And relationships don't go on forever, and a good relationship isn't necessarily measured by how long it lasted, but the quality of it. So there's some thoughts to spark some questions or comments.